I'd like to think I've learned a lot from my time playing Master Duel. When I started a year ago, I was running a plant deck that I used in 2012 and didn't properly update since. Why the hell was I using Rose Witch? And nowadays I have several diamond tier level decks and several fun rogue decks, and have since been getting several friends into Master Duel as well. And that's been going great. Face off. No.
I'm sorry.
Activate it again. No, what are you doing? And in my several periods of climbing ladder, I really have to say, there are some really whack deck builds out there. And I'm not talking archetypes or certain combos, I mean the general builds leave a lot to be desired. I've noticed a lot of general themes, especially new players, that are at least fixable. So I wanted to make a video to address the most common deck building mistakes and how to avoid them. This will be a two-part video, and the second part will go over how to build a good deck in general, so keep an eye out. And this isn't so much a countdown of the worst, more so 5 general things that you should be aware of. So let's begin. Alright, let's say you're a new player who came in as a fan of the anime. You log in and see all sorts of decks you've never seen before. What the hell are Sword Souls? Drytronning? Sky Strikers? Those all sound lame. How about one featured in the anime? Like Kaiba's Blue Eyes White Dragon, Yugi's Dark Magician, or Jaden's Elemental Heroes. And that's the first mistake. Not to say that building a deck based on the anime is necessarily a bad idea. It's limiting, but does at least provide a good reference. And there are some good decks from the anime like Salamangreats, Triple D, and so forth. However, while those are still relatively modern and usable in the current game with some tweaks, the further back you go, the harder it gets. While yes, there are usable decks for Dark Magician and Blue Eyes, too often I see people jump right into those decks without acknowledging the flaws that come with them, and how to better utilize them. The biggest victim of this are heroes, because even though there's a perfectly good hero deck list available, you always see people go for the vanilla heroes from the early days. Why are people so adverse to using the modern day heroes list? Alright. This is one that's going to be a bit weird to explain, but the next one is simply poor card choices. Now, to be fair to new players, if they start the game and add some cards that don't really fit their decks or don't do much, it's understandable. It happens. It's again why doing your research and getting outside help is very useful. The first category is adding weak cards for the archetype. So for instance, most Drytron lists omit Drytron Beta Rastafarian, because it ultimately doesn't do much for the deck. Alternatively, a lot of virtual world decks omit Dragon Long for its overly specific and relatively weak negation effect. However, a new player may not know this right away and still end up adding them. Another common one are adding in certain floodgates that ultimately end up hurting you just as much as your opponent. Marincess, as an example that works, can utilize Gozen Match so that all monsters can only be one attribute, which works well for Marincess as they're all water. However, there are plenty of cases I've seen of players putting random floodgates that end up hurting them just as much as their opponent. Like the morons who added Zombie World into True Draco in the Extra Zero event. You know, the card that prevents you from summoning your own monsters. And finally, you get people adding cards just because they sound or looked powerful back in the anime or back in the day, but can ultimately be redundant or aren't that powerful in a certain meta. Mirror Force is a common one. As well as a decent trap, it's not the big game changer it once was. Again, this is a case of do your research or ask someone for help and you'll be fine.
Plop.
Alright, this is a trend that needs to stop. I've seen this with both new players and old players, and it needs to end. 45 plus card decks. I have seen so many decks with a bizarre amount of cards and they almost never work. To quickly explain why so many decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Aim for the minimum 40 cards, it's because you want to be able to consistently obtain the cards you need quickly and easily. Less is more in Yu-Gi-Oh! And the sooner you can get to your combo pieces, the sooner you'll win. However, the more cards you add into that, the harder it gets to obtain what you need. And I have seen so many decks that add pointless extra drawing cards, traps, hand traps, and even shoving 2 archetypes together that those decks become bloated and unusable. Now there are exceptions to this. If you have decks that rely on discarding to the grave a lot, like Witchcrafter, Dangers, or Virtual Worlds, you can get away with a little extra. And of course there are decks that utilize that grass looks greener, like Dragonlings, Adamantimators, and Phantom Knights. But without that card, those 60 card decks would be useless. And given the recent ban list, maybe you shouldn't rely on grass much anyways. I don't know, it's just a trend I really think needs to stop. And how do you make Numerons bloated? Again, this one is tricky to explain, but it is a very critical one. Ratios. The amount of certain cards you have versus other cards you have in your deck. Let me show you an example I encountered with this branded Despia deck. Now at first glance, this appears to be your basic branded Despia deck. But those experienced with branded Despia are probably going, why would you do that? Only one of Ash called by an imperm? 3 branded in reds? 3 Despian tragedies? 3 of Tax Dragon? We have needlessly limited our combo starters and defense and overexpanded on certain extenders. Sadly, this is so easily fixed. You have to remember, some cards and archetypes are so easily searched, you don't really need an excessive amount of certain cards. Now, to be fair, sometimes limitations of certain cards are for budgetary reasons, which I totally understand, but there are plenty of alternative choices for some of these, and if you're going to blow a lot on a pricey deck like this, put emphasis towards finishing the main deck first rather than some fluff. So you built your deck, you followed all the rules from online, built it 1-to-1 from a list you saw, and you lose, and lose, and lose. What the hell is going on? Is every other deck broken? And that's the other thing you need to do. Relax. You won't be good at the game right away. Just take it slow and steady and practice your deck first before diving into ranked. Also, plenty of decks online can vary from person to person. You shouldn't really follow a post online about what deck builds are necessarily the best, because otherwise you might be lured into a deck that doesn't really pan out in the long run. But regardless, I think it's good to get some advice from experienced veterans who've played the game. I've met some great people who've helped me and friends out with building all sorts of great decks. It's some of the best experience you'll have as a Yu-Gi-Oh player. Hey man, I really think you should drop Wind Up Kitten from your deck. It's just not gonna fit.
No, I don't want to!
So, take it slow, be patient, and you'll get a great deck going in no time. But that's just me. What are your thoughts? What are some tips you'd give to new players? What were some early mistakes you made? Let me know in the comments, please subscribe, and stay tuned for part 2.